I was standing in the ballroom of the Buckhead Grand Hotel on March 12, 2025, wearing my best Navy suit, when I heard my daughter tell a room full of strangers that her father barely finished high school. The words hit me harder than any engineering problem I'd ever solved in my 64 years. What she didn't know was that the Northwestern University Alumni office had been trying to reach me all week about something that would change everything. Before we get into this story, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? And what time is it where you are? Drop that in the comments below. And if you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a like. This story gets deeper than you might think, and I want you here for every minute of it. My name is Marcus William Thompson. I'm 64 years old, and for the past 28 years, I've been a professor of civil engineering at Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta. I live in a modest 3-bedroom house in the Cascade Heights neighborhood, the same community where I raised my daughter Vanessa after my wife. Patricia passed away from breast cancer in 2003. My life has been built on precision, on calculations that have to be perfect, because buildings don't forgive mistakes. Neither, apparently, do daughters. Let me take you back 6 months before that hotel ballroom, to September 2024. I was in my office at Georgia Tech, the one on the 3rd floor of the Mason building with the window that overlooks the campus green. I just finished grading 47 midterm exams from my structural analysis class when my phone rang. It was Vanessa, calling from her townhouse in Vinings, about 20 minutes away. She needed money again. Not a small amount. $12,000 for what she called urgent home repairs. I'd given her $8,300 in July for her car. Before that, $15,000 in April for credit card debt she swore she'd never accumulate again. I transferred the money that same afternoon through my Wells Fargo account. I always did. She was my only child, my baby girl, even at 36 years old. What I didn't know then was that she'd been telling her friends, her colleagues at the marketing firm where she worked, even her boyfriend Devin, that I was uneducated, that I'd scraped by in life doing manual labor, that she'd had to raise herself because I was too simple to understand her ambitions. Every time I sent her money, she apparently told people it was from her mother's life insurance, not from her father's professor salary of $127,000 a year. The truth is more complicated than she ever wanted to know. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, in a neighborhood where finishing high school was considered an achievement. My father worked at the steel mill for 34 years. My mother cleaned houses in Mountain Brook, the wealthy part of town. I was their 3rd son, born in 1961, right in the middle of everything this country was going through. They had dreams for all of us, but resources for none of us. When I graduated from Parker High School in 1979, I was the first person in my family to get a diploma. My grades were good enough for college, but there was no money. None. So I did what I had to do. I worked construction for 6 years, saving every dollar I could. I lived in a room I rented from Mrs. Johnson on 7th Avenue, paid her $85 a month, ate mostly rice and beans I cooked on a hot plate. During those years, people looked at me the way my daughter apparently looks at me now, as just another black man with a hard hat and dirty boots. What they didn't see was that I was studying at night. I'd bought used engineering textbooks from a college bookstore that was going out of business. Paid $127 for a stack of books that should have cost over $1,000. I taught myself calculus, physics, structural mechanics, all of it. In 1985, at 24 years old, I took my savings, exactly $14,300, and enrolled at Tuskegee University. I finished my bachelor's degree in 3 years instead of 4 because I tested out of half my classes. I graduated summa cum laude with a 3.97 GPA. 2 professors wrote me recommendation letters so strong that Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, accepted me into their doctoral program with a full scholarship, plus a $12,000 annual stipend. I spent 5 years there, from 1988 to 1993, researching seismic retrofit techniques for urban infrastructure. My dissertation was 347 pages long and has been cited in 89 academic papers since publication. But I never talked about any of this. Not really. When Vanessa was growing up, I was just dad. I helped with her homework, drove her to dance classes, showed up at every school play. After Patricia died when Vanessa was 14, it was just the two of us. I thought we were close. I thought she understood that everything I did, every extra shift I took consulting for engineering firms on weekends, every paper I published, was all for her future. I put $340,000 into her college fund. She went to Emory University, graduated without a single dollar of debt, while I kept living in the same house I'd bought in 1998 for $178,000. Our relationship started changing around 2019. She got the job at the marketing firm, started dating Devin, who worked in finance and drove a BMW 440i. Suddenly, my house wasn't nice enough when she brought him over. My car, a 2016 Honda Accord with 112,000 miles, was embarrassing in her words. She stopped inviting me to dinners with her friends. When I asked why, she said I wouldn't fit in with her crowd. I told myself it was just a phase, that she was finding herself, building her career. I didn't push. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was not paying attention to the small comments. Like when I offered to help her understand a contract she was signing for her townhouse, and she laughed and said, "Dad, this is legal stuff, not building stuff." Or when she told Devin, right in front of me, that I'd worked with my hands my whole life and wouldn't understand investment portfolios. Each time I felt something crack inside, but I stayed quiet. I'd learned in my 64 years that sometimes people need space to grow, even if that growth means growing away from you. Then came March 2025. Vanessa called me on a Tuesday afternoon, March 4th, excited about a charity gala her company was hosting. The Children's Healthcare Foundation benefit at the Buckhead Grand Hotel, black tie event, silent auction, the works. She asked if I wanted to come. Actually, she asked if I wanted to help out, which I later realized meant she wanted me to buy a ticket so her company would look good. The tickets were $500 each. I said yes immediately. I thought maybe this was her way of reconnecting, of letting me into her world again. I bought a new suit for the occasion. Spent $680 at Men's Warehouse on Peachtree Street. Got it tailored properly. I wanted her to be proud of me, even though I was starting to suspect that ship had sailed years ago. The gala was scheduled for March 12th, a Saturday evening. I arrived at 6:30 p.m., exactly on time, packing my Honda between a Tesla and a Mercedes in the hotel garage. The ballroom was already filling up with Atlanta's young professional crowd, everyone in their 30s and 40s, dressed like they just stepped out of a magazine. Vanessa saw me come in. I watched her face change, just for a second, from a professional smile to something that looked almost like panic. She was standing with 3 other women and Devin, all of them holding glasses of champagne. She waved me over, but it wasn't the wave you give someone you're happy to see. It was the wave you give someone you need to manage. I walked over anyway, my shoes making soft sounds on the marble floor, feeling suddenly aware of every eye in that room. "Dad," she said, her voice a little too bright, "you made it." "Everyone, this is my father, Marcus. Not my dad, the professor. Not my father who teaches at Georgia Tech. Just Marcus, like I was a distant relative she barely knew." Devin shook my hand with the kind of grip that was trying to prove something. The 3 women smiled politely and immediately looked away. I stood there for maybe 90 seconds before Vanessa said she had to check on the auction items, and the whole group drifted away like smoke. I spent the next hour wandering the ballroom, eating appetizers I couldn't taste, watching my daughter work the room like a politician. She was good at it, I had to admit. Charming, confident, everything I'd hoped she'd become. I just never thought becoming that person would require her to pretend I was someone else. Around 8 p.m., I found myself near the bar, close enough to a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Vanessa was talking to two women I didn't recognize. One of them asked about her family, a normal question at these things. I listened to my daughter say, "Oh, my mom passed away when I was young. And my dad, he's sweet, but he barely finished high school. He did construction work, manual labor, that kind of thing. I pretty much had to figure life out on my own." The women made sympathetic sounds. One of them said something about how impressive it was that Vanessa had overcome that background to get to where she was. I stood there frozen, holding a glass of water, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Not a metaphorical truck. An actual truck, the kind I used to calculate load-bearing capacity for in my research. Everything in my body wanted to walk over there, to correct her, to ask why she was lying. But I didn't. I set down my water glass, walked out of that ballroom, took the elevator down to the parking garage, and sat in my Honda for 23 minutes before I could trust myself to drive. The drive home to Cascade Heights took 35 minutes through Atlanta traffic. I didn't turn on the radio. I just kept hearing her voice. Barely finished high school. 4 words that erased everything I'd worked for. Every night I'd stayed up studying while working construction. Every page of my dissertation. Every lecture I'd given to students who actually respected what I knew. Gone. Replaced with a lie that was easier for her to tell than the truth. I pulled into my driveway at 9:17 p.m. The house was dark. I sat in the car for another 15 minutes, watching the lights in my neighbor's windows, thinking about all the times I'd sat in this same spot after Patricia died, wondering if I was raising Vanessa right. Apparently, I had my answer. I'd raised a daughter who was ashamed of me, not because of anything I'd done wrong, but because the truth of who I was didn't fit the stories she wanted to tell about herself. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my home office, the small room at the back of the house where I kept my books, my research papers, my framed doctoral diploma from Northwestern that I'd never bothered to hang anywhere visible. I looked at that diploma for a long time. Doctor of Philosophy in Civil Engineering, it read. Conferred June 18th, 1993. Signed by the university president and the dean of the graduate school. I'd earned that title. I'd worked harder for it than most people could imagine. And my own daughter didn't even know it existed. Sunday morning came with gray light through my window. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at my CV, my curriculum vitae, the document that listed everything I'd accomplished professionally. 12 pages long, 3 patents in seismic engineering, 47 published papers in peer-reviewed journals, 2 textbooks I'd co-authored that were used in universities across the country, awards from the American Society of Civil Engineers in 2008, 2015, and 2022, keynote speaker at the National Infrastructure Conference in 2019. None of it mattered to Vanessa because I'd never forced her to see it, but someone else had seen it. That's when I remembered the voicemail. I'd missed 3 calls during the gala, all from the same number with an 847 area code, Illinois. I played the first message on speakerphone while I drank my coffee. Dr. Thompson, this is Catherine Wright from the Northwestern University Alumni Relations Office. We've been trying to reach you regarding the Distinguished Alumni Awards ceremony in May. Please call us back at your earliest convenience. Distinguished Alumni Award. I sat there staring at my phone. Northwestern gave out exactly 5 of these awards each year to graduates who had made significant contributions to their fields. I'd been nominated twice before and hadn't won. The fact that they were calling meant this time was different. The ceremony was always held on campus in Evanston, Always a big event with current students, faculty, media coverage. They wanted me there. They wanted to honor me. And my daughter didn't even know I'd gone to college. I called Catherine Wright back at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, March 17th. She answered on the second ring, professional and warm. Dr. Thompson, thank you so much for getting back to me. We're absolutely thrilled to inform you that you've been selected for this year's Distinguished Alumni Award in Engineering. The ceremony is scheduled for May 3rd, and we'd love to fly you out, put you up in a hotel, and have you give a short address to our current graduate students. I accepted. Not because I cared about the award itself, though it was a genuine honor. I accepted because a plan was forming in my mind, something I'd learned from decades of solving engineering problems. Sometimes you don't force a structure to change. You just reveal what was already there. The truth was already there. I just needed the right moment to show it. Over the next 2 weeks, I did my research. I started paying more attention to what Vanessa posted on social media. Her Instagram was full of carefully curated photos of her life. Brunches with friends, professional events, weekend trips with Devin. There were old photos of her and Patricia, sweet captions about missing her mom. But photos of me? One, from 3 years ago. A Father's Day post that said, "To the man who did his best." That was it. Like I was a participant trophy she had to acknowledge once a year. I also started documenting our financial history. I pulled bank records going back a decade. Since 2015, I'd given Vanessa $127,400 in direct transfers. College tuition and expenses before that added up to another $340,000. I'd co-signed her townhouse mortgage, enabling her to get a rate of 3.2% instead of the 4.8% she would have qualified for a loan. I'd given her my old Camry in 2018, a car worth $8,500 at the time. I wasn't doing this to throw it in her face. I was doing it because I needed to understand the full picture of how much I'd invested in someone who apparently thought I was too uneducated to matter. On March 28th, Vanessa called again. She needed to talk about Devin. They'd been fighting about money, about his spending habits, about whether he was serious about their future. She talked for 40 minutes straight while I listened, offering quiet advice when she paused. At no point did she apologize for the gala. At no point did she even mention it. It was like it hadn't happened, like I hadn't heard her reduce my entire life to a lie. When she finally stopped talking, I asked her a simple question. "Vanessa, do you know what I do for a living?" There was a pause. Then she laughed, actually laughed. "Dad, you're a teacher. At Georgia Tech, right? You teach engineering or something. Like it was a minor detail, barely worth remembering. I told her I had to go, that I had papers to grade. After I hung up, I sat in my office and let myself feel it, all of it. The anger, the disappointment, the grief of realizing your child doesn't see you at all. But I didn't call her back in anger. I didn't send her articles about my research or forward her the email from Northwestern. I'd learned something important during my years in academia. The most powerful arguments don't need to be shouted. They just need to be presented at the right time with the right evidence. I was building my case like I'd build a bridge, one careful calculation at a time. April passed slowly. I went to my classes, met with my graduate students, published a paper on carbon-neutral construction materials that got picked up by Engineering News Record. Northwestern sent me the ceremony details. May 3rd at 2 p.m. in the Luckham Hall Auditorium. Reception to follow. Approximately 300 attendees expected, including faculty, alumni, and distinguished guests. They asked for a biography to print in the program. I sent them my CV and a professional photo from the university website. On April 15th, I did something I hadn't planned to do. I called my younger brother, James, who still lived in Birmingham. We talked maybe 3 times a year, usually around holidays. I told him what was happening with Vanessa. I expected him to tell me to let it go, that family was more important than pride. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Marcus, you spent your whole life trying not to make people feel small. Maybe it's time you stopped letting people make you small." Those words stayed with me. I wasn't trying to embarrass Vanessa. I wasn't trying to hurt her. But I was done disappearing to make her comfortable. I was done being the father she could explain away. I earned my doctorate. I built a career. I'd contributed to something meaningful to the world. And if she couldn't accept that, then maybe the problem wasn't me. By late April, I'd made my decision about how this would play out. Northwestern had sent me 2 guest tickets to the ceremony. I could bring anyone I wanted. I thought about bringing James or one of my colleagues from Georgia Tech, but there was really only one person who needed to be there. On April 28th, I called Vanessa. I kept my voice casual, easy. I told her I had something important happening on May 3rd, and I wanted her there. She asked what it was. I said it was a ceremony at my old school, nothing major, but it would mean a lot if she came. She hesitated. She had a work thing, she said. I pressed gently, told her it was really important to me, that I didn't ask for much. Finally, she agreed. She'd drive up to Evanston, meet me there. I told her the time and place, sent her the address. I didn't tell her what the ceremony was for. I didn't tell her that Northwestern had already sent out press releases announcing this year's Distinguished Alumni Award recipients. I didn't tell her that her father, the man who barely finished high school, was about to be honored by one of the most prestigious universities in the country. I spent the next few days preparing my remarks for the ceremony. Northwestern had asked for a 10-minute address about my journey and my work. I wrote it carefully, draft after draft, trying to find the balance between honesty and grace. I talked about growing up in Birmingham, about my parents who never went to college but taught me the value of education. I talked about working construction and studying at night, about how knowledge doesn't care where you come from, only where you're willing to go. I talked about my years at Northwestern, about professors who saw potential in a 27-year-old black man from Alabama who didn't fit the typical profile of a doctoral candidate. And I talked about teaching, about how every semester I saw students who reminded me of my younger self, uncertain, hungry, brilliant in ways the world hadn't recognized yet. I talked about how my job wasn't just to teach them engineering, but to show them that they belonged in rooms that had historically kept people like us out. It was a good speech, honest, the kind of thing that might even make a daughter proud if she was willing to listen. I flew to Chicago on May 2nd, landed at O'Hare at 3:30 p.m., took an Uber to the Hilton Garden Inn in Evanston, where Northwestern had reserved me a room. The campus looked different than I remembered, bigger and newer, but the feeling was the same. I walked around for an hour that evening, past the buildings where I'd spent 5 years of my life, past the library where I'd written most of my dissertation. I'd been happy here, young and poor, and working harder than I'd ever worked, but happy because I was building something. The next morning, May 3rd, I put on my best suit, the same navy one from the gala. I got to Lutkin Hall at 1 p.m. for the rehearsal. Catherine Wright met me in person, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an efficient handshake. She walked me through the program, opening remarks from the dean, introduction of the 5 award recipients. Each of us would accept our award and give our address, then a reception with food and networking. Simple enough. The other recipients arrived. A woman who'd founded a biotech company, a federal judge, a novelist whose book I'd actually read, and a man who'd developed clean water systems for developing countries. Impressive people. I belonged among them, I realized. Not because I was smarter or better, but because I'd done the work. That's all any of us had done. We'd seen problems and spent our lives trying to solve them. At 1:45 p.m., the auditorium started filling up. I stood backstage, looking through a gap in the curtains, watching students and faculty take their seats. I didn't see Vanessa yet. Part of me wondered if she'd even show up. Then, at 1:58 p.m., I saw her. She walked in wearing a cream-colored dress, looking around the auditorium with the expression of someone who wasn't quite sure why she was there. She took a seat in the middle section, about 10 rows back, checking her phone. The ceremony began at 2 p.m. sharp. The dean of the graduate school gave welcoming remarks, talking about Northwestern's commitment to excellence and the extraordinary alumni who carried that excellence into the world. Then Catherine Wright stepped to the podium to introduce the first recipient, the biotech founder. I watched from the wings as each person was called, as they accepted their award and gave their address. The audience applauded warmly for each one. Then it was my turn. Catherine Wright read from my biography. Dr. Marcus William Thompson graduated from our doctoral program in civil engineering in 1993. Since then, he has published 47 peer-reviewed papers, holds 3 patents in seismic engineering, and has taught at the Georgia Institute of Technology for 28 years. His research on sustainable urban infrastructure has influenced building codes across the United States. Please welcome Dr. Thompson. I walked onto that stage, and the applause washed over me like water. From where I stood, I could see the entire auditorium. I could see professors I remembered from 30 years ago, now with gray hair and reading glasses. I could see current students, young and hungry like I'd been. And I could see Vanessa sitting in row 10, her face completely frozen, her phone halfway to her lap, staring at me like she'd never seen me before in her life. I accepted the award, a crystal piece engraved with my name and Distinguished Alumni in Engineering 2025. The weight of it in my hands felt substantial, real. I set it on the podium and looked out at the audience. I found Vanessa's eyes and held them for just a moment before I began to speak. Thank you, Dean Morrison, and thank you to Northwestern University for this incredible honor. When I arrived here in 1988, I was 27 years old, 6 years out of working construction in Birmingham, Alabama. I have $340 in my bank account and a bachelor's degree from Tuskegee University that I'd earned by studying at night after 10-hour shifts carrying steel beams. I tell you this not for sympathy, but for context. I could see Vanessa's hands gripping the armrests of her seat. She wasn't moving, wasn't blinking. The people sitting near her had no idea they were witnessing anything other than a standard acceptance speech. But I knew. And she knew. My parents never went to college, I continued. My father worked in a steel mill for 34 years. My mother cleaned houses. They taught me something more valuable than any degree. They taught me that dignity comes from the work you do, not the title on your office door. When I was accepted to Northwestern's doctoral program, my mother cried for 20 minutes. She said, "Marcus, you're going to be Dr. Thompson. You're going to be somebody." I told her I was already somebody. The doctorate was just proof of what I always known about myself. The audience laughed softly at that. I let the moment settle before going on. I spent 5 years here studying seismic engineering, researching how to make buildings safer in earthquake zones. My dissertation examined retrofit techniques for urban infrastructure, particularly in communities that couldn't afford expensive reconstruction. I focused on those communities because I came from one. I knew what it meant to live in buildings that weren't built to protect you. I talked for another 6 minutes about my research, about teaching, about the students who reminded me why the work mattered. I didn't mention Vanessa directly. I didn't need to. Every word of that speech was a correction to the lie she'd told, a restoration of a truth she'd tried to bury. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood. I saw professors nodding, students smiling, and I saw Vanessa, still frozen in her seat, tears running down her face. The reception afterward was held in the building's atrium, tables laden with food and drinks, people mingling and congratulating the recipients. I was immediately surrounded by faculty members wanting to discuss my recent paper on carbon-neutral materials, by students asking about graduate school advice, by alumni sharing their own stories of improbable paths to success. I was polite, engaged, present, but I was watching for Vanessa. She didn't approach me. She stood by the far wall, near the exit, looking like she wanted to disappear. Every few minutes, someone would walk past her, and she'd force a smile, but mostly she just stood there, holding a glass of water she wasn't drinking. After about 30 minutes, I excused myself from a conversation with a current engineering professor and walked over to her. "Vanessa," I said quietly. She looked up at me, and her eyes were red. "Dad, I don't." She couldn't finish the sentence. I nodded toward the door. "Let's go outside. We should talk." She followed me without a word. We walked out of Lutkin Hall into the May afternoon, finding a bench near the campus green where students were studying under trees, oblivious to the earthquake happening between a father and daughter on a bench 50 feet away. I didn't wait for her to speak. I'd waited long enough. "On March 12th, at the Buckhead Grand Hotel, I heard you tell people I barely finished high school. You told them I did manual labor and that you had to raise yourself." I stood there and listened to my daughter erase me. My voice was calm, factual. I could have been reading a weather report. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it, opened it again. "Dad, I can explain." I held up a hand. "Please don't. Not yet. I need you to listen first." The afternoon sun was warm on my face. Somewhere across campus, I could hear music playing, student life continuing in all its messy, hopeful chaos. "I did do manual labor," I said. "For 6 years, I carried steel, poured concrete, worked in heat that would make you sick. I made $8.50 an hour. I lived in a rented room with a hot plate and studied engineering textbooks I bought used because I couldn't afford new ones. That's all true. What's also true is that I took that experience and turned it into a bachelor's degree, then a doctorate from one of the best universities in the world." Vanessa was crying openly now, not making a sound, just tears streaming down her face. I kept going. "I spent 28 years teaching students who looked like me, who came from where I came from, showing them they belonged in engineering schools and research labs and boardrooms. I publish papers that change building codes. I hold patents that make structures safer. I did all of that while raising you by myself after your mother died." "I know," she whispered. "I know, Dad. I'm so sorry. I was trying to." She stopped, struggling to find words that would make sense of what she'd done. I waited. Finally, she said, "My friends, the people at work, they all have these impressive families. Lawyers, doctors, executives. When they asked about you, I felt, I don't know, embarrassed? Like you weren't enough. The honesty of it hurt worse than the lie had." "Embarrassed," I repeated. "Of a man with a PhD, of a professor who gave you $340,000 for college so you'd never have student debt. Of a father who sent you $12,000 3 months ago because you asked." Her head snapped up. "You kept track?" I looked at her evenly. "I kept track of everything, Vanessa. Not to use against you, but because I wanted to understand when I became someone you needed to lie about." She was shaking now, her whole body trembling. "I messed up. I messed up so badly. I don't even know when it started. It was just easier to say you were. Simpler than you are. Devin and his family, they're all old money, country clubs, legacy admissions. When they asked about my background, I thought if they knew you worked construction, they'd respect that more than if they knew you were a professor. Like being self-made was more impressive than being educated. But then it just became the story I told. And I started believing it myself. You started believing I was uneducated, I said. It wasn't a question." She nodded miserably. "I convinced myself that you were just a teacher. Not a doctor, not a researcher. Just someone who did an okay job and lived a small life. I think I needed to believe that because if I admitted how accomplished you were, then I'd have to admit that I haven't done anything nearly as impressive. I'm 36 years old, and I work in marketing. You were changing the world at 36. I couldn't compete with that, so I just deleted it. There it was. The real truth underneath all the lies. She wasn't ashamed of me. She was ashamed of herself. She'd rewritten my story to make her own seem bigger, more impressive, more self-made. And in doing so, she'd erased the very person who'd made her life possible. Vanessa, I said, and my voice was gentler now. I never needed you to compete with me. I never needed you to be a doctor or a professor. I just needed you to be honest, to be kind, to remember where you came from. She was sobbing now, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and broken. I'm so sorry, Daddy. I'm so sorry. How do I fix this? Tell me how to fix this. I sat with that question for a long moment, watching students cross the green, thinking about all the years I'd spent solving problems. I don't know if you can fix it, I finally said. Not right away. You spent years building a lie. It's going to take time to tear it down. But here's what you can start with. You tell Devin the truth. You tell your friends the truth. You tell your colleagues the truth. And you ask yourself why my accomplishments made you feel small instead of proud. She nodded, wiping at her face with her hands. Will you forgive me? I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised from birth, who looked so much like Patricia. It sometimes hurt to see her. I already have, I said. But forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to how they were. You've shown me how you see me. I can't unsee that. We're gonna have to rebuild from here, and I don't know what that looks like yet. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing what had just happened. Finally, Vanessa said, "The award ceremony. You invited me here knowing this would happen. You knew I'd hear them call you Dr. Thompson, hear them talk about your research and your patents. You planned this. I didn't deny it. I did. Because I couldn't figure out how to tell you the truth in a way that you'd actually hear it. You'd rewritten history so completely that my words wouldn't matter. You needed to hear it from someone else. You needed to see the proof. That's..." She started, then stopped. "That's really smart, actually. And kind of devastating." I almost smiled. I'm an engineer. We solve problems. This was a problem. She shook her head slowly. I deserved worse than this. You could have called me out at that gala. You could have embarrassed me in front of everyone. But you waited. You gave me a chance to see it myself. I shrugged. Humiliating you wouldn't have taught you anything. It would have just made you defensive. This way, you had to sit with the truth for a while before we talked. She looked at me with something like wonder. You're a better person than I am. I shook my head. I just have more practice. 37 years more practice, to be exact. You're 36. You've got time to figure out who you want to be. But Vanessa, you need to understand something. The people you're trying to impress with your background and your boyfriend's money, they don't matter. Not in the long run. What matters is whether you can look at yourself and be proud of who you actually are, not who you pretend to be. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Catherine Wright. Dr. Thompson, just wanted you to know that your speech was the highlight of the ceremony. Several students have already asked for your contact information. You've inspired a lot of people today. I showed the text to Vanessa. She read it and started crying again. You inspire people? She said quietly. And I tried to make you invisible. The reception was winding down, people starting to leave the atrium. I needed to get back, to say proper goodbyes, to finish what I'd come here to do. Vanessa, I need to go back inside. You can stay if you want, or you can head home. But I think we're done for today. This is a lot to process. She stood up when I did. Can I call you? Later this week? I considered that. You can. But when you call, I need you to be ready to have some hard conversations. About the money I've given you. About your relationship with Devin. About what kind of relationship we're going to have going forward, because it can't be the one we had. That's over." She nodded, accepting the terms. "I understand. And Dad? Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." I didn't respond to that. I just walked back into Lutkin Hall, back to the reception, back to the celebration of accomplishments my daughter had tried to erase but couldn't, because the truth has a way of surviving even the most dedicated lies. The following week was strange. Vanessa called on Tuesday, like she'd promised. We talked for an hour. She'd told Devin about the ceremony, about my background, about everything she'd lied about. According to her, he'd been confused about why she'd hidden it. "You told me your dad was blue-collar," he'd apparently said. "Having a dad with a PhD is impressive. Why would you downplay that?" She didn't have a good answer for him. She didn't have a good answer for herself. She'd also started telling her coworkers the truth. "My dad's a professor at Georgia Tech," instead of vague references to me being simple or not educated. She said some of them were surprised, asked why she'd never mentioned it before. She told them she'd been stupid, that she'd taken him for granted. Baby steps, but they were steps in the right direction. On Thursday, May 15th, something unexpected happened. I received an email from one of Vanessa's coworkers, a woman named Jennifer Chun, who I'd met briefly at the charity gala. The subject line was an apology and an opportunity. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but curiosity got the better of me. Jennifer's email was 3 paragraphs long. She apologized for believing Vanessa's story about me without question, said she felt terrible for the assumptions she'd made. Then she explained that her company was launching a STEM mentorship program for underprivileged youth in Atlanta, and they were looking for professionals to serve on an advisory board. Would I be interested? I forwarded the email to Vanessa without comment. She called me 20 minutes later. "Dad, I swear I didn't ask her to do that. I told people the truth, and Jennifer must have looked you up, and I'm sorry. Is this weird? Tell me if this is weird." I told her it wasn't weird. It was actually thoughtful. I agreed to meet with Jennifer about the mentorship program, which eventually led to me joining the advisory board in June. It was good work, meaningful work, connecting kids from neighborhoods like the one I grew up in with engineers and scientists who could show them a path forward. But the real change happened slowly, in smaller moments. Vanessa started asking me about my work. Real questions, not polite questions. She asked what I was researching, why it mattered, what challenges I was facing. She asked about my time at Northwestern, about the students I taught, about what it was like being one of the few black professors in my department at Georgia Tech in the 1990s. She listened like she'd never listened before, like she was discovering I was a whole person she'd never bothered to meet. In late June, she broke up with Devin. She didn't ask my opinion before doing it, just called to tell me afterward. He wasn't a bad guy, she said, but I realized I was with him because of what he represented. Old money, country club access, all of that. I was doing the same thing to him that I did to you, reducing him to a symbol instead of seeing him as a person. That's not fair to anyone. I told her I was proud of her for recognizing that. Growth doesn't happen all at once. It happens in these small moments of clarity. On July 4th, I hosted a barbecue at my house in Cascade Heights, something I hadn't done in years. Vanessa came, and she brought a friend from work, and we sat in my backyard eating ribs and corn on the cob while I told stories about her mother that I hadn't told in a decade. At one point, Vanessa went inside to get more drinks, and her friend turned to me and said, "She talks about you all the time now." Like, constantly. She told me about your research on seismic engineering, and I had to look up what half those words meant. I smiled at that. "She didn't used to talk about me at all," I said. The friend nodded. She told me that too. She said she spent years being ashamed of the wrong things and proud of the wrong things, and she's trying to fix that. It was the most honest assessment of Vanessa I'd heard from anyone other than Vanessa herself. By August, we'd settled into something new. Not the relationship we had before, because that was built on her not really seeing me. This was something else, a relationship built on honesty, on respect, on her actually knowing who I was and choosing to show up anyway. She still called when she needed advice, but now she also called just to talk. She sent me articles about engineering innovations, asked if I'd seen them, wanted to know my thoughts. She remembered details about my work, asked follow-up questions weeks later, and she stopped asking me for money. Not because I'd cut her off, but because she'd started budgeting differently, living within her means, making choices that reflected the values she claimed to have. In September, when her car needed $3,200 in repairs, she called to tell me about it, not to ask for money. "I've got it covered," she said. "I've been saving, but I wanted to let you know because, I don't know, that feels like something you tell your dad." It was. It was exactly the kind of thing you tell your dad. Not because he's a bank, but because he's someone you share your life with. Someone who cares whether your car is working, whether you're stressed about money, whether you're okay. On October 18th, 2025, Vanessa showed up at my house unannounced. She had something in her hands, a framed photograph I'd never seen before. It was from the Northwestern ceremony in May. Me on stage, holding the Distinguished Alumni Award mid-speech. She must have taken it from her seat in the auditorium. "I got this printed," she said, "and I wanted to ask if you'd be okay with me hanging it in my living room. Not to show off to guests or anything, just because it's a good picture of my dad, and I should have pictures of my dad in my house." I looked at the photograph. The lighting was good, caught me at a moment where I looked confident, accomplished, exactly like the person I'd spent decades becoming. "You can hang it," I said, "but only if you want to, not because you feel guilty." She shook her head. "It's not guilt, it's pride. I'm proud of you, Dad. I should have been proud of you all along, but I'm proud of you now, and I want that to mean something." We hung the picture together, on the wall across from her couch, where she'd see it every day. She stood back and looked at it for a long time. "I'm going to be better," she said quietly. "I know I keep saying that, but I mean it. I'm going to be the daughter you deserve to have." I put my hand on her shoulder. "You already are. You're just figuring out what that means. That's all any of us can do." Here's what I learned through all of this. Karma isn't about revenge. It's not about making people suffer for what they've done to you. Karma is just the natural consequence of actions catching up with themselves. Vanessa had built a lie, and that lie eventually collapsed under its own weight. I didn't destroy it. I just revealed what was already true. And when the truth came out, she had to decide who she wanted to be in response to it. She chose growth. She chose honesty. She chose to be uncomfortable with herself long enough to change. Not everyone makes that choice. Some people would have doubled down, gotten defensive, blamed me for embarrassing them. But Vanessa did the hard thing. She looked at herself clearly and didn't like what she saw, so she started changing it. As for me, I learned that silence isn't always strength. I'd stayed quiet for years, telling myself I was being patient, being understanding, giving Vanessa space. But silence in the face of disrespect isn't patience. It's permission. By not correcting her lies, I'd allowed them to grow until they became her reality. Sometimes love means saying, "No, that's not true, and I'm not going to pretend it is." I also learned that the relationship I thought I had with my daughter was never real. It was a performance where I played the role of the simple, uncomplicated dad, and she played the role of the daughter who'd overcome humble beginnings. Once we stopped performing, we could actually see each other. And what we saw was harder, messier, but real. Real is better. Real can be built on. Northwestern called again in November, asking if I'd be willing to mentor a graduate student who was researching sustainable infrastructure in underserved communities. I said yes. That student, a young woman from Detroit named Aisha, reminded me of myself at 27. Brilliant, hungry, carrying the weight of everyone who believed in her. I met with her every other week via video call, helped her refine her research questions, connected her with colleagues who could support her work. Vanessa asked to sit in on one of those calls. I let her. Afterward, she said, "That's what you do. That's who you are. You see potential in people, and you help them become who they're supposed to be. You did that for me, even when I didn't deserve it." I told her everyone deserves it. Everyone deserves someone who sees them clearly and believes in them anyway. It's January 2026 now. Almost a year since that gala. 10 months since the ceremony at Northwestern. Vanessa and I have dinner every other Sunday, alternating between her place and mine. We talk about her job, my research, politics, her dating life, whether I should finally renovate my kitchen. Normal things. Father-daughter things. Sometimes we talk about the past year, about how far we've come, about mistakes made and lessons learned. Last Sunday, she told me she'd been thinking about going back to school. Maybe an MBA, maybe something else. She wasn't sure yet. But she wanted to challenge herself, to build something more substantial than a marketing career. "I think I've been coasting," she said, "and I don't want to coast anymore. I want to work towards something that matters." I told her that whatever she decided, I'd support her. Not financially, unless she really needed it, but emotionally, intellectually, the way a father should. Before she left that night, she hugged me. A real hug, not the performative kind from before. "I love you, Dad," she said. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to really see you." I hugged her back. "I love you too. And I'm glad you finally do." She laughed at that, a real laugh, free of guilt and performance. "Yeah," she said. "Me too. This story doesn't have a neat ending because life doesn't work that way. Vanessa and I are still figuring out who we are to each other. She's still working on being the person she wants to be. I'm still teaching, still researching, still trying to make buildings safer for people who can't afford safety. But we're doing it honestly now. We're doing it with our eyes open. And that's worth more than any award, any title, any recognition. Being seen by your child for who you really are, and being loved anyway, that's everything. So to everyone watching this, let me leave you with this. Don't let people write you out of your own story. Don't stay quiet when someone reduces you to something smaller than you are. The truth matters. Your accomplishments matter. Your dignity matters. And if people can't handle the truth of who you are, that's their limitation, not yours. Thank you for watching this story. Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring about an old professor and his daughter finding their way back to each other. If this resonated with you, if you've ever felt unseen by the people who should see you most clearly, leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Let's build a community of people who refuse to be diminished. And please, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a like to help this story reach more people. Your support means everything to this channel, and I read every single comment. Remember, patience and wisdom will always outlast arrogance and lies. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to show up at the right time. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And don't let anyone write you smaller than you are.